Alright, today we're going to be covering Eddy and Eddy Lost episode. And this particular story, I guess, will hit close to home for me as someone who grew up a huge fan of Eddy and Eddy. So it'll be interesting to see how this will be subverted and, I guess, twisted into a horror context. It was one of the first times in a long time where I actually wrote down notes as I was reading the story. So this will not be my initial first impressions. This will be me reading the story to you after I've already read it myself. So if my reactions don't come off as, I guess, over the top as they usually do, it's because I already read it. Okay, let me just go over my notes real quick. I worked really hard on it. It took me a whole 7 minutes to write all this down. Okay. As you may know, the popular show Eddy and Eddy has been running for a long time. However, between October 7th, 2003 and October 21st, 2003, episode 34 was accidentally released 1 week before it was scheduled to. Let me look that up actually. It was episode 25. Wait a minute, hold on. So not 25, it's 34. So let's see, 34, which is not true. Episode 34 aired on March 8th, so you fail. You fail, sir. Wait, hold on, the time frame is like all wonky, right? Like, okay, in October 2003, but episode 34 aired in 2002. You failed on every account, sir. I didn't even notice that. That's not even in my notes. I just registered that just now. I learn something new every day. That phrase means nothing in this context, but I said it anyway. Also, let me see. It accidentally aired. Okay, it was released 1 week. I don't think it would take. I think it takes usually up to 5 to 6 weeks to produce an episode of a cartoon, if I remember right. Although it's still around about a month, and it said it was released early, so I could be wrong. I'm not particularly familiar with the time frame, and honestly, it's kind of immaterial to the real issues that plague the story. It was also known to some around the office that the prime. Wait. It was also known to some around the office the primary writer had been sick with the flu. Add the word "that" before "the." It was also known to some around the office that the primary writer had been sick with the flu, and instead of going on to make episode 34, the show was supposed to replay episode 1. Around 5 a.m. Eastern, people reported a very disturbing new episode premiering on Cartoon Network. Some children were unfortunate enough to see it. There's a lot of things, I guess, wrong with that. Let me see. Eastern. Because I don't think they would air stuff like that. I think that's around when Adult Swim will be going off, right? Oh, well, was Adult Swim around at that time? Hold on. Let me look that up right now, actually. I don't know why I started thinking about these things after I've already... Okay, Adult Swim. Let's just look that up and see where it initially... No, not AdultSwim.com. Oh, how this thing used to be so novel. Come on. Okay. Yeah, around 2003, so I think that would be around the time where Adult Swim would be going off. I think or it was around 10 to 4 or 11 to 4 or something like that. I don't remember. It's been a long, long time since I sat up at late at night watching shows I was probably not supposed to watch. Well, excuse me, there is no probably there. I was not supposed to be watching them to begin with. So, again, I think I'm really getting pedantic, and there's really no point when it comes to a lot of Lost episodes going into the finer details, although the finer details usually do help bolster the narrative that you're trying to form when you're trying to, make this as realistic as possible. You want to always try to make the actual details as accurate as feasibly possible, because when people look that up, it adds a layer of credibility to the narrative that you're trying to weave. So I would always recommend people do that. Stories like what was it called? Like I think a good example of that would be Abandoned by Disney. Like Abandoned by Disney, I don't think is a flawless story, but the details of the setting in which it takes place and the history behind the amusement park where the story unfolds uh, is more or less correct if I remember right. Now again, I'm going based on memory, and it's been like years, but I remember looking into it, and I think the Slime Beast did do his homework when it came to actually putting pen to paper and actually trying to weave a narrative. And again, when you add that layer of credibility, it grounds your story and makes it so people are willing, or at least more willing, to buy into whatever you're trying to sell. So, sorry. Let's get back into this. People reported a very disturbing new episode premiering on Cartoon Network. Some children were unfortunate enough to see it. Apparently, the quality of the episode was mediocre, and when held to the regular standards, the animation was choppy, the sound was constricted and very muffled. And reports of a line running up and down, similar to a crappy VHS tape, were received. Scenery was described as overwhelmingly dark and depressing without changing props or background objects, stormy looking. Characters also behave oddly. Instead of the normal goofy, hijink-inspired personalities, the viewers complain that they seem extremely agitated, gratuitously hateful towards each other, and constantly about to begin sobbing after the lines. Well, the former two don't sound too out of character. Like, let's face it, like Ed, and Eddy is a show that kind of is very much rooted in some level of mean-spiritedness, and for the most part, none of the characters really got along with each other. They just had to coexist, which is true to life. The protagonist also had a very bad list. No one knows why, but it spoke with I forgot about this line. It spoke with a sexual tone that further bothered viewers. Okay, this is going to go into a problem that this story has overall, is that there's a lot of weird details in certain areas, and they seem so disconnected, and there's no real explanation for them. And that last point, I'll explain why that's a bit of an issue as I, get near the end of the story. I was one of these viewers. Oh, lucky you. The episode began with Eddy walking down the street with Ed. I noted that Ed was missing. There was an angular shot coming from in front. In front is not one word. In front of the two. It's in dash front. I don't know. I've never seen anyone do it like that before. In front of the two, to show them walking toward the viewer. He, being Eddy, was wearing the angry look he does when something goes wrong. His eyes were red around the iris. Ed was looking absolutely forlorn and practically dragged behind Eddy, tears in his eyes, which were both lazy and looking in opposite outward direction. Again, that last part is just Ed being Ed. Kevin, the series antagonist, was riding his bike opposite towards the Eds. Sorry, what if the comments are? It's kind of misplaced. Kevin, comma, the series protagonist, and there should be a comma right there instead of it just keeps running on. Kevin, the series protagonist, was riding his bike towards the Eds, opposite the Eds, towards him. The shot became blurry, and low moans were heard coming from Eddy before Kevin hit him, which never happened because the screen went to black. The screen then snapped back, and Kevin was headed towards Eddy. The view was so blurry this time, all I saw was a green blob hurling toward a yellow one. Again, the low moan. Only this time it sounded like the microphone was broken and loud static came, greatly overshadowing the moan. A claymation sequence of Double D sleeping in Eddy's bed came up. Honestly, it might have just been the abruptness, but I jumped and shivered. I don't really need you to tell me about... I don't know, like... That's one of the issues I have with the story, and that actually did shut down in my notes here, my handy-dandy notebook, is that the initial start of the story starts off as almost biographical. We're just going over the details of how the story came to be and like how people actually ended up seeing it, and that alludes to the idea that this person probably did some level of research, and they're just trying to recall the details as best as they can. And then you have these instances. Well, the narration shifts from the biographical tone from the beginning, and it goes to anecdotal as the story goes along, of this person talking about how they watched the episode, how it made them feel at the time, which again, really isn't all that pertinent to what they're watching. Um, it's one of those instances where I think that the writer feels the need to try to use certain. I don't know. I don't know how to put this. I don't want to say it's emotional manipulation. Like they want to basically like there's certain words and terms and phrases like shivered and whatnot, which will try to ease the reader into a certain state of mind and try to how to push them there without actually guiding them with the narrative itself, with the narrative being the outlining of events as they happen, which is how stories like these should generally go. Now, when it comes to a lot of lost episode type stories or lost media type episodes, there are usually one of two ways that you can take it. You can, like I said, biographical, where you're trying to outline in the most concise and, well, relatively concise, and I would say a formal way you possibly can. The details of the media that you're covering, and you're trying to convince everyone is real. The formal type of writing that you choose, and being as detailed as possible when it comes to like certain things, so you can convince people that it actually happened or the thing that you're talking about actually exists. Like you have to some degree showcase your knowledge of the piece in question or the series that it comes from. Like maybe it's a lost episode of like a lost video game or a lost episode, as you know we're reading right now, and you need to showcase a certain level of knowledge so people will be more willing to buy into the narrative that you're selling. Like it engenders trust from the reader. Like, oh, I forgot the word. It's it gives you a position of authority to speak on it if you showcase your knowledge, and that's the biographical way to do it. And then you have the anecdotal way, which is like I was up a certain time of night, and I happened to come across this really messed up episode. And I think the best example of a story that goes for something that's more anecdotal, although it's a little bit unconventional in that it's not just one narrator, but Candle Cove, with multiple people basically trying to suss out whether what they remember about it, and their memories are not necessarily perfect. They get certain details wrong, or you know they misremember certain details, and you're allowed to have flourishes where people basically talk up like certain instances and how it made them feel, because again, like it just makes more sense, because it's not people that are trying to just like recall these details for the sake of like cataloging them. These are people that are usually like they live to see something that really resonated with them, and they want to see how many other people also saw what they saw. And this, it begins with the former. It begins, but like I said, biographical. Then it goes to anecdotal, and I think you can have a happy marriage with the two, but it's usually not. It usually doesn't work out that well. Okay, I went on a long tangent. I usually have to reserve these for the end. Let me see. A claymation sequence, it made him shiver, waking up and getting out of bed. He moved oddly around the circular room, the fast-paced pitter-patter of footsteps being the only audio. The step sounds were very clear as I was shown a bird's-eye view of him scampering around the room. There were no visible doors. Ed began screeching. I want to say, Ed being double D, by the way. It's Ed with two Ds. I'm only specifying because that's what he's called in the show. Say for the very, very early episodes. Like I think episode 1 is the only time that I can think of where another character just calls him Ed instead of like his nickname. I just want to eliminate any confusion. It sounded like a Fisher cat as he moved wildly around the cell of a room faster and faster until it began blurring again. The purple room's color swallowing in an outer orange blur. An extreme close-up of Eddie's front door sat in absolute silence for a maddeningly long time. At least 2 minutes of dead silence in the door. A maddeningly long time. Again, that's that That's the anecdotal tone coming in again. That anecdotal narration, where it's someone being as informal as they can be. It doesn't. Again, it doesn't work. I don't know. I don't know how to put. Like, I'm trying to think of a way to go about doing it in a way that actually would be effective, but it's not really coming to mind. Next, we see Jimmy and Sarah at the doctor, at a doctor of some sort, probably oral. I would you if I were you, writer, and it's been. I know it's been like almost a decade. It probably has been like a solid decade since you actually did write this. So, whatever you're doing right now, on the off chance that you hear this, yeah, use the official term because oral has a different connotation in this day and age. Or we could just say mouth doctor. People would, I don't know, maybe it's a me problem. Next, we see Jimmy and Sarah at. You know what? No, it's not because I remember there's something that's going to come up later on, and it kind of leans into my fucked up state of mind, and it shows that I am not alone. Is basically Jimmy, in an obstructive view by a hanging lamp, is crying loudly with Sarah trying to comfort him in an unusually warm fashion. It's not really that unusual because Sarah, that's the only person that she's ever consistently nice to. It hurts, Sarah. It hurts. Suddenly, the door to the room is smashed open by a new character, a dentist. His face wasn't shown because he was tall enough to be out of the shot. Sarah was escorted out of the room. Jimmy was shown. His gear was mangled, the front bent upward, stretching his lip very high, tearing proportions. Okay. The front of his gums was trickling blood, and his teeth were missing. Excuse me. The disturbing part is he lost both his arms and legs beforehand, apparently, and sat up paraplegic. He lost both his arms and legs beforehand, apparently. You don't need to have apparently at the end of that. I almost cried as I came to the conclusion that the others had beaten him up and bent his headgear. Where did that come from? Like, there's nothing to allude to that. Nothing at all. Why would you even come to that assumption in regards to... Like, this is clearly... I didn't think about it. The fact that this would air after probably... Like, let's say that, hypothetically, that this episode did air, like, at 5 a.m. Eastern. I, being a little kid, would probably come to the conclusion that it was like some adult, like, parody of Eddy and Eddy. But then again, I don't know how old the narrator in this story is supposed to be. Maybe it's like a little kid, and like their imagination runs a little bit more wild than someone who's a little bit older than they would be. The camera stayed on his mangled face for a few seconds, still as a picture, silent as ever. Commercials came on. We are instantly assaulted. Oh God, I can't. Okay. We are instantly assaulted with a very hairy Rolf in his darkened shed, fisting the cow repeatedly. The cow, by the way, just singular. Rolf only has one cow. The visual... I think he does, actually. Does he? Yeah, I think there's only one cow on Rolf's farm. So, okay, never mind. The visual loops... Again, the visual loops... No, there isn't, because I remember in that episode when they were running that pet boutique. Wait a minute. Hold on. Sorry. I'm trying to think. Oh God, I know these episodes by almost by heart. Okay, so this was Double D flossing the cow's teeth while Ed was putting lipstick on them, or was he hanging the chickens? Someone in the comments, please tell me. I want to know. I need to know. Because I need that to verify whether or not the fictional character did or did not have more than one cow. That's very important to me. It's a part of my childhood, goddammit. The visual loops and gets blown. Oh yeah, the cow being fisted by Rolf in his shed. Okay, the fact that he's very hairy, does that mean he's shirtless doing this, or he just happens to be like werewolf arms as he's doing this? The visual loops and gets blurry again as the scene pans out. Nad's reading a magazine on her couch. Let's go from okay. Jimmy was assaulted and had his limbs divorced from his body, I guess you could say. uh, Freaking Double D's having a nervous breakdown while he's like locked in Eddie's room. Rolf is fisting a cow, and Sarah's just reading a magazine. The quality is now perfect. Eddie is now alone without Ed. Like, what was the point of that? And honestly, and at this moment right here, where it says like it just cuts to like some, I guess what's supposed to be like some semblance of normalcy, like a brief reprieve from the madness that the viewer is experiencing. I find it very odd that for some reason the narrator doesn't comment on that, you know? After everything they had been made to witness before, and which, honestly, it's kind of weird because they're very selective on what they choose to pick up on. Like, Rolf fisting a cow has nothing to say about that. It's just like, okay, I guess the most emotion that they show during that scene is that we're instantly assaulted, which means, obviously, they found the imagery, like, revolting. So I guess that's something, but it's still like a very subdued reaction to what would be like a horrendous scene. And then after that, like, it cuts to like some normalcy when Nasser's reading a magazine on the couch. And it's no comment on that. It's like saying like, oh, this is a welcome change of pace. I was very confused as to what was happening. Like, none of that. And it kind of goes to show what I was talking about before, where you need to pick what kind of narration style you're going for when it comes to these stories. Like, are you talking about this like from a first-hand account? Because then it almost necessitates that you talk about how these things, what kind of mindset that these things put you in, and how it made you feel. Like, it's only when you're writing in, like I said, a biographical sense, in a formal way, then you like don't mention like your feelings on the matter are immaterial, reactions are immaterial. Eddie is now alone without Ed. The quality declines worse than before, and he is still walking, the sun now lightening the mood somewhat as he smiles and begins running. The door is shown again, and we see through Eddie's eyes as he reaches out and opens it. The house is nice and bright, but a very badly played violin is blaring. I get that's supposed to be unnerving. I guess almost like the Song of Unhealing type of unnerving sounds. But immediately, if you're an NNA fan, your mind's probably just gonna go to the freaking episode with the violin where Ed has to practice playing violin. He's not good. The only audio in the scene as he makes his way through the house. Okay, I don't know if you guys can hear that. That is an ambulance. Here's hoping for the best, whatever's happening at the moment. Eddie opens the door to his room. No, it's not an ambulance. There's a police. Johnny is shown under Naz's couch. Is it? No, I can't remember. Weirdly enough, I can't differentiate siren sounds. I'm sorry, everyone. Johnny is shown under Nasa's couch cushion as he crawls out on all fours in the comedic well and pops up behind her, still oblivious. I laughed because someone forgot to draw his eyes, and I thought of a mole. Okay, I think the narrator's a little special. Suddenly, I stopped laughing as he started swallowing her head, still in a cartoonish fashion, of course, but this was different. He and she stayed like this until she started kicking and struggling. Johnny held her like this until she went limp. A zoom in on his face revealed very small and human eyes. And again, fans of Ed and Eddy, like, oh, I thought of a mole. Like, oh, you mean like that episode of Ed and Eddy where they pick everyone's careers and Johnny is a gopher, you know? That's another problem with this story, is that when you mention offhandedly things like this, people are immediately gonna like think off to like episode, like if you mention instances that actually might have like tangentially happened in the show, people are going to start thinking about that, and it kind of dissuades them from getting into a mindset where they're more accommodating to the fear that you're trying to instill in them. Double D was laying on Eddie's floor, no longer claymation. The camera showed Eddie's house for the remainder of the episode, about 3 minutes, and then the next program began on the spot. So yeah, that was Ed and Eddy Lost episode. That is how it ends, by the way. It just kind of just peters out. And let me see, I think I have something about that in my notes. The ending is very abrupt, and it feels as though the author didn't feel the need to tie up any loose ends. I think it's trying to end on a mysterious note with things remaining up in the air as to what happened, but it kind of flies in the face of the opening, where the narrator goes into some level of detail in regards to the production, which means that he did have something of an interest regarding the origin of this episode and what happened and what more or less led up to it. And the fact that they're not willing to cap off the story kind of flies in the face of what they initially tried to set up. I wrote down this complaint, and I don't really know if I can really direct this at an Any Lost episode specifically, because it's an issue with a lot of Lost media stories, especially around this time, is that the events as they laid out are very disjointed and don't seem to have any central theme or narrative really tying them together. And I think that might be more true to life, in a sense that, let's say for the sake of argument, that this was a episode made by someone who's probably like out of their mind and manic, and they're not really thinking straight. They're just like putting like this gibberish out with the intention of airing it to people. It's not necessarily going to be themed in any way. It's not necessarily going to all be connected. Like if it's it's a ramblings of a madman, it only makes sense that it will be very disjointed and not really flow in a satisfying narrative structure. But the problem with that is it doesn't make for an interesting read. And I think I mentioned this time and time again when it comes to lost media stories. The horror of the story never comes from the fact that the characters are acting out of character, because at the end of the day, it's still fictional characters on a fucking screen. You can make them behave any way you want to if you have the gumption and you can actually draw it and animate it yourself. We see it all the time. It's parodies. Like I immediately think to that Peanuts parody where they're like shooting and killing each other, and it's like done perfectly in the art style of the Peanuts cartoons. And I think that's not enough. They actually did, the people who made that actually did show the creator of Peanuts, and he was not too pleased. But you get the point. Like it can be done. So you could imagine that you can. If that was not widely known, that whole thing with the parody of the Peanuts, the Violet one, was not widely known, someone could probably just take that and slap it on the Creepypasta wiki and weave a little story about that, and people would still perceive that as an actual horror story, because they wouldn't register the fact that it was animated by someone else. They would, for some reason, see it as horrific that characters are not acting as they are in the original work. It's not really that interesting. Now, I think maybe you can do something with that idea where the horror comes from the characters just not behaving as they should, if it alludes to something outside of the piece itself. And what I mean is, and again, it always feels weird to use this as a positive example, but Squidward Suicide is, again, very much not a very good story in any capacity. But what I always use as an example of a story, like one aspect done of lost media done right, is that the horror of the story is supposed to be derived from the fact that someone was more or less a snuff film into the studio. And in that story, it alludes to the idea that someone had murdered children and basically plastered the footage into this film they made for God knows what reason. Now, and there where you have the characters watching it unfold, there is a very slight semblance of a narrative being weaved within the footage that they're watching. It's not much, and it's not. And again, it comes off as very tasteless, and that story still has a lot of issues because it still wants to try to dip its toe into the supernatural, which immediately kills any interest, and also the fact that the characters aren't the least bit acting like rational normal thinking people where it's like, oh, let's just keep this watching the thing. We have no other choice. Steven Hillenburg himself came in and said like, hey guys, what the his heck is going on in here? But that's beside the point. The point I'm trying to make is that the person who wrote that story understood that having Squidward put a bullet to his head and put a gun to his head and pull the trigger, that's not enough to really shock people. What really jolts people or unsettles them is something material, something that they can actually work with and actually imagine and resonate, something that actually resonates with. I just look at my notes. I think I more or less outlined everything. The fact that the story is disjointed. I have one note talking about my issue with the beginning of the episode where I can't tell if the opening where they mentioned that the primary writer, which it's kind of weird that they didn't give the name to him, but to be fair, like when people think about Ed and Eddy, all they think about is Dan Anaguchi. Like there are more writers than him, but I don't think anyone talks about them. So the primary writer had been sick with the flu, and I'm not sure if that's supposed to be an explanation as to the kind of fucked up imagery. Like maybe someone who was on the flu produced this episode while they were in a really messed up headspace, or it was just like said offhandedly to explain why the new episode was not in production. So instead, they got this weird, like bizarre project someone worked on. I'm looking at it right now. Okay, episode 37 was accidentally released a week before it was scheduled to. Okay, so it was released a week before it was scheduled to, and I think the episode that they're talking about was episode 34, which I don't know I really don't know what they're trying to like. That seemed like an unnecessary detail, and honestly, if I had to put myself on a pedestal in any capacity, and I really do apologize. But honestly, if I were writing a story like this, I would just like cut out a lot of the beginning. Well, I would have to reassess how I would go about writing it to begin with, because again, like, what are you trying to achieve? Like, what kind of story do you want to make? And I should mention that there's a video accompanying this story where it basically is just showing what was described in the last paragraph, where it's Double D laying on Eddy's floor, which he's not, by the way, in the footage. He's just laying on the bed and just like, oh, it's creepy and it's wavy, and they basically edited to make it look like it was a VHS tape, which, again, that's another weird detail that doesn't really do anything for me. Now, I don't know, like, I feel weird criticizing this story for all these issues because it's a microcosm of the issues that really plague this specific genre of creepypasta. Lost media is a very easy genre to mess up, and I don't know, I can only point to like maybe a handful of them that actually do get it right, and it's usually stories that work within their own means. They come up with original shows and whatnot, and they tell tales about those instead of what we see here, where they take an established piece of media and think that perverting the imagery in any way will be enough to incite horror in people. Like stories like Candle Cove, like that one story, what was it, Mr. Pinky? Or is it Pinky's Playhouse or something like that? Well, I remember we read that on my channel. I was with Raptor Rex and two other guys. I can't remember. It's been a while since I last streamed. Obviously, I'm using it as a positive example too, which is weird since I don't remember the name of it. But it was like a weird evangelical show where they had their own original content that they made. Well, they made up a piece of lost media, and it works better because then they have to put the focus on actually like trying to make something that you can envision. And the more detail they put into that, the better we can envision it, and the more we, as the reader, get a little bit unnerved as we can better imagine the scenarios playing out. And since there's not connected to any established media, we basically have no choice but to take the narrator's word as to whether or not something is amiss in the work in question. And it's, now I think about it, I think the approach that's been working recently, where it seems like it's been a more okay, excuse me. I think analogy horror is more or less lost media as a genre, but done. It's basically just more refined. Like analogy horror is basically taking lost, like making up lost media and like taking that format and having it translate into something that is actually, for the most part, pretty much successful. Like I think there's a lot of people that are really digging it right now. As like that and liminal horror is like the trendy thing right now, and it's people who like really understand the kind of psychology behind those types of stories and that kind of narrative style, where it's, I don't know, like any like lost media in general. Like sometimes, like when you stumble across something that has been effectively buried by time, it feels like you're unearthing something that was meant to be not for anyone else's eyes, and that allure, that sense of mystery, can complement horror very well. Like, and it sounds really messed up. Like when people like it's a really weird example, but Red Letter Media, and they joked about this on I think on Bunny Ears on Macaulay Culkin's channel. They joked about the idea like when they go through all their VHS tapes for Best and the Worst, like, you know, Macaulay Culkin's looking at to see if the quality was just bad enough, and occasionally he stumbles across a snuff film, and he's puts it in a pile that's sent to FBI, and that's the kind of thing I'm talking about, where again, something so messed up that was obviously meant to be buried and forgotten by the person who put it together, and then you unearth it, and it feels so twisted in that sense, where you managed to dig up something that was never meant to be aired, never meant to be seen, and was probably better off being unseen. But I'm going on a tangent right now, and I really, what are we talking about again? We're talking about Ed and Eddy Lost episode. So I don't really have anything else to say. I actually went on a very long tangent. I can't believe I took notes for this, to be honest with you, because again, this is basic tier Lost episode, especially for the time, and I give some leeway to it because it's I think around a decade old now. Let me see. Let me see. And one of the most annoying things about this website is the fact that I need to go all the way down to the very beginning of the comments to see when it might have potentially been released, because there's no date associated with it. Thank you, fandom. You're a fucking garbage fire of a website. Yeah, it's basically, it is oh my goodness, it is a decade old. This thing is wow, amazing. So yeah, this wasn't very good. That's all I have left to say. So feel free to tell me what you guys think. What do you guys think about analogy horror and Lost episodes? Do you have any particular classic pastas that you would like me to critique and evaluate on this little channel of mine? And you know, like, comment, subscribe, and all that stuff. Feel free to post some suggestions down below, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your evening.